So I wanted to talk about Anakantavad's videos on uh, on being a victim, because he says that you just choose to be a victim. Then he had answered, not directly to me, but he did answer that he's not talking about being you choose to be a victim of getting robbed or beaten up or something like that, kidnapped, whatever the thing would be, the objective victimization of someone. But so here's the problem, because I think his is kind of perfectly inverted. So a little asterisk. I don't know how many people will get this analogy, but if you scatter iron shavings between two magnets, right? So you have a positive on one side and a negative on the other, and of course they line up. But there's actually two stable alignments. One where, the negative side, the iron filings are like little magnets, and its negative side is towards the plus plate on the outside, and its positive side's going towards the minus. It zips around with the attraction. So the two ends that are attracted to each other get closer. But it's also, if it's exactly opposite of that, that's also stable. It's not as stable because a little tiny, if you shake the table back and forth, it'll flip around into the other state. It's like it's got some potential energy there, but it's just because if it's perfectly lined up, that also mathematically holds it a little bit, enough for it to stay in that position. But it's inverted. And that's kind of how I feel like, there's the lines, it's along the right lines, but the arrow's in the wrong direction, the opposite direction. Because, so here's the thing, he's talking about like victimhood or people who play the victim, or he used an example of a woman who castrates a man through playing the victim. And that's what he means, and I think he said essence of, the victim ideology. He's using Gary as an example, which I don't, I'll go back to how Gary relates to this example. We're using him as a metaphor instead of iron shavings. But in a minute, or I might forget. So the thing is, so he's calling the essential victim mentality the mentality of people that make excuses and blame others for things as a general habit. That's the victim ideology. Maybe you could state it better to get the idea, but that's the general idea. And it's people that weren't victims, or at least relative to this, there was no real victimization. And this is the whole thing about the film strip ideology and methodology that I use, is that if you want to have something named a victim, thinking of yourself as a victim, what does it mean to think of yourself as a victim? What mindset is it? Then I think you have to go to the film strip and you see experiences where you were objectively victimized. Your car was broken into, you got pushed into the lake. Those things both happen, only one of them to me. And so, and you'd see the mindset that you had from actually being victimized. And you'd also go to the film strip for your experiences of other people's being victimized, bombed in a war or whatever. And you look at their mindsets. You wouldn't go to the people that weren't victimized but are claiming to, right? That makes no sense, right? That's the opposite kind of direction. So there's truth in what he describes about this mindset, but to relate it to actual victimization is ridiculous. it's unrelated. It's the people that weren't, the mindset of people that blame everything. So I made a video about Gary that was saying Gary doesn't take responsibility for everything, and this is what leads to hatred of life. Because when you do that, you keep bounding yourself. You know, no matter what happens, you're giving someone else the ability to constantly stop you, and then the range of where you feel free, it gets smaller and smaller. And but that's not being victimhood. That is never taking responsibility. It's different. You know, I saw this movie recently. I think it might be an HBO movie. Laura Dern plays this woman, and it's a autobiographical with some of the names changed in it, not hers. And it starts off, she's a writer, and she's looking into this relationship she had when she was young with an older man, and and she ends up having these memories that come back to her, and she interviews people from that time, and uh, it wasn't a relationship with an older man. She was 13 and he was like 40 or something, and a coach. And one of the devices they use is she sometimes kind of is talking to her younger self. So, not to go into the movie any more than that, that's the basis. She, as a young girl, was like, I'm not a victim. You know, she ended up breaking with him and he cried, and I was in control. You know, I'm the one in control. He cried, I'm not a victim. And this was directly related, and this is where I think is a true thing, to she also hadn't occurred that he would do this to other girls, right? But of course he did. But as a 13-year-old, she didn't think of that. She was thinking of it as a relationship and all sorts of things to look at it as not being a victim. And it's almost automatic. And when your car is broken into, you look for that. You try to blame yourself. That's an actual victim complex thing. Is when you get victimized, you will try to blame yourself. What could I have done to not get in that situation? And so there's this truth in this whole idea of when you've been victimized, you need to find ways to get control of the situation, or at least to process the situation and not give up control in your own life as a result. And this is something you have to go through. If you just bury it and go, I wasn't a victim, then, for example, she's saying that all the other girls that this guy victimized, that they weren't victims either. And it ends up just being a way to avoid the phenomena of real victimization. And how could it turn out different than that? You can do these analysis on words, and it's like game theory. Words gather ideas and people into certain different groups, and then where that group goes is like one took the low road and one took the highway, one took the river and one climbed the mountain, and they just get set off in the wrong direction. And if you're going to think of victimization as the attitude people have that weren't victimized, then yeah, you're going to be ignoring real victimization. It's inevitable just from the way the ideas work. Those ideas are like lathes, like a lathe, that the incoming data in the film strip gets lathed on, and so you could just erase the phenomena of victimhood if you set the lathe of victimhood on those that aren't really as victimized, because there's also levels. An Anakantavad is hi Anakantavad, talking about your idea, but also to you, is often like anybody can say they're a victim. Yeah, anybody can say anything. This is the thing that people miss about mosquito, about relativism and skepticism. Don't bite me in the ear, you mosquito. Which is that just because the facts are different from everybody's own frame of reference and point of view, that doesn't mean that you get to just say what they are, right? See what I'm saying? So, like, my velocity relative to the moon is different from your velocity relative to the moon. Since we're spinning in circles, we're actually not moving the same speed relative to the moon. They're different. but that doesn't mean you could just say what yours is. Mine's 100. You know, you could say um, your opinion on things, but you can't say your facts just because they're relative to you. They still have to be calculated, discovered, and measured and whatnot. So saying you're a victim doesn't mean, oh, I guess you're just as much as a candidate as anybody else. No, it's not about what people say. So ignoring real victimization is, it's a mistake. It's the kind of thing that if your reasoning leads to something that concludes that, then there was a problem in the principles or the logic used to add up the principles. It's actually the most important thing, is the victimization, the oppression of people, at the root of which is basically straightforward: war which leads to slavery. So, to simplify it. All right, I did enjoy those videos though, and yeah, I think saying Gary is the ultimate victim is the wrong way. I don't think Gary goes in that direction. I'm not defending Gary because I think he's just using the wrong word on a situation that's more like Gary always blames other things. Like even if Gary blames himself, then he's blaming nature and the fact that there's an inner ape and he's just addicted to life, and so of course he had to act like an ape. You know, he was built that way. So there is something just wrong naming in putting it that way, I think. And though I didn't call you Anakantavad, I didn't call you any names, I hope you appreciate that my destruction of your ideas is pretty complete, right? It's just as good as if I called you names. Or is it not? If I destroy your ideas and don't call you names, then that probably makes people feel worse. They'd rather have some names, and then they could explain it to themselves that that's why they're upset with what I said. You have never gotten too shown a lot of distress at what I've said to you, which I really appreciate. But sometimes I think you've grinned and bared it. And this is just something I'm thinking through because I consider myself a very gentle philosopher in discussions, but people don't seem to treat me that that's what's gone on. So, it's food for thought. But I did like your videos on this subject. And like I say, I think the laws of physics, using that physical analogy of the magnetic pole, is that the laws of physics show in your analysis. So I appreciate that, right? It's a feature in there. But I just think it's backwards because the victim mindset should be the mindset, like a PTSD is a part of it. Which is funny because when you victimize, like in war and you kill people, that gives you PTSD too. So you would like that thing where, who is also the victim. And in that sense, there's some cycle of victimhood all around, and we should have thick skins and stuff. So, but you've got the arrow in that direction with the little tiny things holding it. When you shake things up like an actual war and real problems that we have in this world, the arrow goes the other way. That's what I'm saying. All right. Cheers.